This is the Lew Rockwell Show.
What an honor to have as our guest today Judge Andrew Napolitano. He was, of course, a judge. He's been a professor of law. He's the author of two very important books, Constitutional Chaos and Nation of Sheep, two more in the pipeline. He's the Senior Judicial Analyst for Fox News and is the co-host of Brian and the Judge radio show. Judge Napolitano, so great to have you with us.
And is a big fan of the Mises Institute and of Lew Rockwell and LewRockwell.com.
Well, thank you, sir. You know, your book, Nation of Sheep, is such an extraordinary work on what's happened to civil liberties in the last 8 years. What's your view about what's ahead for us? We've had a very bad record under Bush. What's ahead with Obama?
It's hard to believe that the record could get worse than it was under President Bush. And I guess when you're trying to predict the future, you're influenced a little bit by what you want to happen as well as what you expect to happen. I would like to think that President-elect Obama, as a lawyer, as a constitutional scholar, as a professor of constitutional law at the University of Chicago, of all places, where respect for individual liberties, I know, is taught in the law school, would have a healthier respect for the Constitution than John McCain would. I have, of course, profoundly criticized the Bush administration, the Patriot Act I, the Patriot Act II, the new FISA law. These run rampant over basic First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment liberties. We can get into details if you want. President-elect Obama voted against the Second Patriot Act. He voted in favor of the FISA law. I think, and again, I'm influenced by what I hope, that he voted in favor of FISA to remove it as an issue in the campaign because he didn't want to be perceived as, quote, defending the rights of terrorists, close quote, which is an argument the other side always makes. But Jeff Rosen of George Washington University and of the New Republic wrote a great piece a few months ago listing the many, many things that Barack Obama has said, which give us a little bit of hope that he would be more of a purist for the Constitution. Having said that, I don't expect the Democrats to undo the Patriot Act. I don't expect the Democrats to undo FISA, but I don't expect a President Obama to try and scare the daylights out of Congress into doing things. I expect a little bit more of an open administration. Look, I'm not happy with the outcome, but John McCain's views of the Constitution were draconian. I mean, he was of the view that if he didn't like an opinion of the Supreme Court, it could be changed by an act of Congress. He was of the view that the Congress has the right to enact legislation that makes it a crime to engage in political speech and naming a candidate by name in the 60 days preceding an election. He was of the view that if the Congress didn't want you to have habeas corpus, it could, by ordinary legislation, just take it away from you. So he certainly wasn't a human being in whom one would comfortably repose custody of the Constitution. Now, Barack Obama, on the other hand, apparently sees somewhere in the Constitution the right to take from A and give to B. I'm talking about wealth redistribution. It's not there.
Judge, when Senator McCain seems to me to have almost the same position on the executive, on the so-called unitary executive, as President Bush does, is there any indication in Obama's advisors or in his background that perhaps he's not such an advocate of what in earlier days would have been called executive dictatorship?
I don't know of any indication, Lou, except I somehow can't see President-elect Obama signing, for example, a piece of legislation which makes it a crime for federal agents to read mail without a search warrant and saying at the time he's signing it, I'm not going to enforce this. I just don't see him doing that. I think he would have a slightly healthier respect for the rule of law. From that, I conclude, and again, my conclusions are animated in large measure by the human virtue of hope, that he would not utilize the executive branch in such a draconian way. But I cannot point to specific resistance on his part to specific acts of President Bush, the way you can with, say, the liberal Democrat from Wisconsin, Russ Feingold, who was a champion of civil liberties, and would, in chapter and verse, attack what President Bush did and attempted to do. Barack Obama's not in that category, but I'm just hoping that we're going to get a healthier respect for the constitutional limitations on the part of the presidency.
We can certainly hope that things like the Military Commissions Act and all the rest of the horrible tyrannies that Bush undertook and that have been repudiated in this election. I mean, this election is in effect the defeat of George W. Bush, much more so than McCain.
You know, it's funny you should say that. I could not agree with you more. And I just had on my radio station, my radio show, Ed Rollins. Now, Ed Rollins managed both of Ronald Reagan's campaigns. I mean, he's a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, and he managed Mike Huckabee's campaign during the primaries this past year. He, too, said this is an utter and total repudiation of the presidency of George W. Bush. And in terms of the Military Commissions Act, that's a good example, because Barack Obama not only voted against it, he argued against it on the floor of the United States Senate. Now, there's some things he can do to unilaterally undo it. He can, with a stroke of a pen, close Guantanamo Bay. That would force the removal of the detainees there to some place in the United States, which would force civilian trials in federal district court with the full panoply of constitutional protections. Whether he will actually initiate legislation formally to undo the Military Commissions Act, I don't know. But it's an act that gives him powers that he doesn't have to use. And those powers, as you know, are truly dictatorial. I mean, that's the act to which I was alluding when I spoke at the Mises Institute this past weekend, which, for example, gives the president the power to incarcerate after acquittal. After acquittal. I mean, there's no other act anything like it in the history of Western law. In fact, I don't even know anything like it in the history of any law anywhere on the planet that would allow the prosecuting entity to incarcerate the defendant after the court has found the defendant not guilty. But that Military Commissions Act of 2006 does give the president the power to do it. I hope Barack Obama doesn't use that power.
Well, one thing that's encouraging is that at least the Democrats have within their movement a pro-civil liberties constituency. It's not the ruling constituency, but at least it exists. There doesn't seem to be any such thing within the Republican Party.
Well, there's a little bit in the Republican Party. Our mutual friend, Ron Paul, and a number of his colleagues in the House feel that way, but it's a much larger, more vocal, more politically influential group in the Democratic side, led by Representative Jerry Nadler. Now, I disagree with Jerry on a lot of things, but not on civil liberties. On civil liberties, he's absolutely fabulous, and he's not afraid to reach across the aisle to shake hands with people like Ron Paul. The other interesting development, and we began to see a little bit of this today, part of it from Ed Rollins that I just mentioned, part from Senator Jim DeMint of North Carolina, and part from Senator Tom Cochran, who's also a physician, of Oklahoma, ripping apart the Republican Party for its Republican Party in the Congress for its slavish obeisance to the White House, ripping into it for a big government takeover of education, takeover of prescription drugs, now takeover of banks and insurance companies, and arguing that the Republican Party will pass into oblivion unless it returns to small government, maximum individual liberties, states' rights roots. Now, we've heard this before, and even under the presidency of Ronald Reagan, whom a lot of your friends and mine liked, we didn't always get what was promised. It was more lip service than substance. But I do believe that a Democrat in the White House will liberate some of our libertarian Republican friends in the Congress to be more themselves, to sharpen the arguments, to force legitimate debate on civil liberties, on the Constitution, on the role of the presidency and the government, and on the role in our lives, debates which we did not hear during the Bush administration because Republican leadership was afraid of those debates.
Well, it's absolutely true, and I think that I agree with you. I mean, I think that it may turn out that getting rid of the right for a while, which has had such a rotten record in spending and civil liberties and wars and just many other different areas, and bringing in the left may actually mark, at least for a while, an improvement in some areas like civil liberties.
Hard to believe, but yes, it may happen. And I was not able to stay at your wonderful gathering in Auburn this weekend after my own small part in it. It would be interested to know what Congressman Paul thought about that. I mean, it was kind of obvious, I think, by then which way the election was going to go. I mean, he can play a major role. I mean, they have to get rid of the leadership in the House. I don't know that they're going to make Ron Paul the minority leader on the floor of the House. Probably not. He's too intellectually honest for that crowd. But he might have a lot more influence than he did under the George Bush acolytes, who have driven us into debt and away from the Constitution in the past 7.5 years.